Okay, we're back. Hopefully we will finish the second part of 2 Samuel, the second book of Samuel. We're starting on 13. So let's get started. Okay. So, this is going to start off with a bang. Amnon defiles Tamar. It seems that the Lord's punishment continues in the house of David since he committed adultery and killed Uriah, the husband of the woman he wanted to marry. So he cheated with her and that. So, okay. So it seems the Lord's punishment continues, and his adult son, Amnon, who once loved his sister, had a friend who was telling him he should have his way with his sister. And so he used his father to send his sister over to the house, and he raped her. Then, now remember what the Lord told him, he would divide his house and all of these things. So it's sad, but then Amnon hated her more than ever after he did that. More than he ever loved her, and he sent her away. So Absalom, her other brother, she went to his house, who forever after that hated his brother Amnon for raping their sister, but never said anything to him. So when King David heard all these things, he was very angry. So Absalom avenges his sister. Absalom invited all the king's sons to his house for a party. So let's get to the next page. Where are we? Yeah, so it's all this and this. So Absalom invited all the king's sons. He told his servants to get them all drunk and he wanted them to kill his brother Amnon for raping their sister. And so they did, and then they fled. And King David was told about Absalom had killed all his sons, and he was distraught. And his other son came and said, no, it was just Amnon who was dead because he raped his sister. So Absalom fled for 3 years. He just was out of there. King David wept and mourned for 3 years over his son Amnon. And so I came over here, and they basically talk about, in the beginning, we read about the horrible event. David's oldest son Amnon rapes his half-sister Tamar, and it may surprise us to read that people in the Bible do such things, but it reminds us that the biblical period are human beings just like us, and often human beings do cruel things to one another. When bad things happen within the family, it is especially difficult because family members are supposed to look out for one another. What Amnon did to Tamar is a sin and a crime. His actions are also tore David's family apart. Today, we would counsel Tamar to tell someone about what happened to make sure she receives the care she needs. Amnon would be arrested for his crime to his sister. If you or someone you know is ever a victim of sexual abuse, whether a perpetrator or family member, tell someone else. Make sure to let someone know about it. Tell trusted adult outside the family, a teacher, counselor perhaps. The abused person's welfare is more important than someone's reputation. Now, if you notice, all that box is talking about telling someone, if you know someone that's been raped, but they're missing the point. David is continuing to be punished as the Lord told him that he would. And they're applying today's standards back then. I don't know that they're applying it, but they're not making it clear to, maybe they are further, but from what I saw, they weren't. And they're talking, instead of taking the opportunity to talk about sin of the criminal, instead of healing of the victim, which of course is very important, but we're focusing here on the Lord and sin, and that's what this is about. Therefore, that is what God intended when he put the story in here. And so I think they're missing the opportunity. So today we can't kill men for raping women and revenge. That person will go to jail. Well, they didn't have jails back then. So from what I know, I think they just killed them. Okay, so we are David. Okay, here it is. David is persuaded to bring Absalom back. Joab convinces King David to allow Absalom to come back to the kingdom by having a handmaid come and ask for justice with circumstances that would seem similar to the king's. And he gives her the right advice, and King David gives her the right advice that, this person shouldn't use violence to avenge violence or to kill someone, so then they tell him that they were actually deceiving him, and that they were talking about him to help him understand. And so he's not pleased, but he forgives and agrees to have Absalom come back to the kingdom. So Absalom comes back to the home, and he's described as very, very handsome and perfect. Not a blemish on him, they say. Okay. He is, so he grants him home, and he's gorgeous. Right there it tells you about it. And then it talks about him having 3 sons and 1 daughter, Absalom. And he names one after his sister Tamar, and she's a very beautiful woman. David forgives Absalom. 2 years later, Absalom asked Joab to come and ask his father, King David, for forgiveness. Joab finally agrees, and King David calls for him. Absalom throws himself at his father's feet, and the King David kisses him, and he's forgiven. Okay. But then Absalom wants, I guess, revenge. Absalom tries to usurp the throne. Absalom plotted to become king and intercepted justice cases, and forgave those who came. And he was building this not fan club, but everybody wanted him, so the people began to love him because he was giving them what they wanted. So his followers grew in number. Okay. So David flees from Jerusalem because his son is trying to take his kingship and kill him. So King David is told about everyone pledging their loyalty to Absalom, and he's so upset he goes up to Mount Olive and is weeping barefoot, with his head covered, and his people were as well. And so his head is covered, praying that this is all not happening, sort of in denial, I guess. So his friend Hushai becomes David's spy. David's friend Hushai met with him, and he asked him to go spy on Absalom and pretend to be loyal to him and get information. And so he goes. So in 16, David meets Ziba. Ziba was the servant to Meshobeth, the son of Jonathan, his good friend, who was killed on the same day as King Saul. That was his father, remember? So he's the grandson of King Saul. Well, he came and said that Mephibosheth is still in Jerusalem, and says that the house of Israel will give me back my kingdom of my father. So obviously, King David, here he had adopted him, and now he's angry because this kid is like, okay, give me back everything now. I'm grown and all this. So King David says, well, guess what, Ziba, you can have everything that I was going to give to Mephibosheth. It's all now yours. The servant is shocked, and he's like, but I'm a servant. And he said, that's okay. It's all yours. The servant was happy and grateful. So he was causing a little rift between the two of them. So I guess David's house is falling apart. And the Lord's promise, probably, for him killing Uriah sure seems to be coming to pass. And he said he would tear apart his home, and this was his adopted son now. So 2 sons. So one son is dead, killed by the other, and now he's trying to take his kingdom, and now his adopted son is trying to take his kingdom. So yeah, his family is definitely falling apart. So Shimei. So David walked along. Shimei, out of the family of the house of Saul, throws stones at David. He's calling him a murderer, and told him, the Lord is avenging you for killing and stealing the house of Saul, and you should be ruined. Do you notice everything is going wrong for King David since he sinned and cheated and then killed the husband? He turned to Shimei and said, it's already happening. My own son is trying to steal my life. How much more the Lord has sent him. So he said, go ahead, continue to curse at me. I deserve it. Maybe the Lord look upon my affliction, and the Lord will bless me from you cursing me. So by the time David and his men arrive on their journey, they're exhausted. Okay. So, the council of these names. Ahithophel. The council of Ahithophel. So David's friend Hushai reaches Absalom and convinces him he's on his side to serve him. Absalom asks Ahithophel, who was once King David's highest, most respected counselor, for advice. And he says, go and lay with your father's concubines, and everyone will know that you're now king, and you are definitely your father's enemy. Do you notice how God is absent from everything in all this chaos? He is just walking into one mess after another. So 17. Sorry, my hand. Okay, the council of Hushai. So then Ahithophel advises David to let him take 12,000 men and go and pursue King David while he's asleep, and his men, and then he could kill him, and bring the men back to serve him as the new king, King Absalom. So Absalom decides to take Hushai's advice as well. Hushai tells him, that's not a good idea. And your father's a very good, long, experienced warrior, and he does not even sleep among his men, and gives him a different plan. Because, of course, this is his friend, and he doesn't want that to happen to King David. So Absalom decides to take Hushai's advice over the more experienced Ahithophel's, and disaster soon follows. David... Yeah, so that's where he's telling him, no, don't do that. That's bad advice. So that's what he's telling him. So Hushai goes back and warns David to escape. And then Ahithophel finds out his advice is not followed, and he hangs himself, because he was once a very respected advisor to King David, and then goes to his son Absalom and gives him bad advice. And so he commits suicide because he's so ashamed, I guess, and he's buried in the tomb of his father. So the defeat, so that's all basically Hushai warning King David. So and then he was buried. Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed. He saddled his donkey off to his own city, hung himself, and is buried in his father's tomb. So then the defeat and death of Absalom. King David has 3 commanders: Joab, the son of Joab's brother, and another with strict instructions to be gentle against King David's son Absalom as they remove him. 20,000 men were killed, and then at one point Absalom was seen in a tree. Joab ordered him killed, and all the men said, but the king said to deal gently, and he will find out. So Joab says, that's okay. So he stabs Absalom. Let's see. So he stabbed him into the heart, and then everyone surrounded Absalom and they killed him. So Joab throws Absalom in his body into a big pit with a heap of stones, which is now called Absalom's monument to this day. Again, this is an old book. Wouldn't it be great, though, to go to Jerusalem with Jeff Cavins? Maybe he would show us all these places that are mentioned here in his Bible. That's what I'm assuming that's about. He's leading us with him. I would love to go. Who knows? Maybe I will. David hears tidings. David is told of Absalom's death. He weeps. Oh, my son Absalom. Oh, my son, my son. I would have died instead of you. Absalom, my son. So he has a real hard time about his son dying. So, no matter how much parents and children love one another, there will come times where they won't get along. It happens in every family. Even King David has difficulties with his son Absalom, big ones. Absalom killed his half-brother because he raped his sister. Talk about your family troubles. Eventually, David and Absalom were reconciled, but the struggles continued. In some families, certain family members or relatives do not talk to one another. This may have gone on for years, as hard as it is. We have to be willing to do two things with our parents and siblings: show them respect and love they deserve, and always try to make things right. We shouldn't leave the house or go to our room at the end of the day angry with a family member. Try to reconcile. Take the first step if you need to. Family is just too important a part of our lives for us to stay mad at one another. Is there someone in your family you tend to be reconciled? You need to be reconciled. What's keeping you from doing that? Ask God for help and forgiveness. Something my mother helped me with. Unfortunately, it was after her death. Okay, so 2 Samuel 19. David mourns for Absalom. He just cannot get over it. So King David mourns for his son. His commander Joab is annoyed with him, telling him, "We saved you and all your family, and you love those who hate you, and you hate those who love you. And if you don't go and tell the people something about our victory, I'm out of here." So evidently he doesn't care 2 bits about him. He just, it's all about him. So King David goes to the gate, but the people have lost confidence in him. So David is recalled, but he doesn't get out of power that quickly. So, and then David is asking for the priests. "Are you not bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh?" And he's like, "Where are you guys?" So, he's asking for them to come. He's looking for God, really, is what he's doing. Shimei meets David and is forgiven. The men remind King David of what Shimei did and wanted to know if they should kill him. David said no. He told Shimei, "You shall not die." He forgives him. And he says, "I don't even know if I'm king anymore." Okay. So, oops. David and Mephibosheth meet. Remember? Mephibosheth came to King David and his servant and told him his servant had deceived him and he should have known better. He says, "I have no right to cry to the king." King David said, "I don't want to speak any more of your affairs. You and Ziba can divide the land." So he became somewhat fair after him doing that. Even though it says he's out of power, he's actually not yet. So David blesses Barzillai. An old servant asks to retire, and David blesses him. And that's, that's this one. David blesses Barzillai. So that's all that. And it's not that interesting, so I kind of brush over it. Okay, so dissension between Israel and Judah. There's arguing between Israel and Judah. And it's fiercer than ever, but it's just an argument. There's no actual killing, so I'm not going to get in too much into that. There's not a whole lot about it, but at least in this one. The rebellion of Sheba. Sheba, a worthless fellow, a Benjaminite, blew the trumpet and said, I have no portion of the land. So David, we have no inheritance, the son of Jesse. So all the men of Israel begin to follow Sheba. He has nothing to lose. He's like, okay, things are weak. I'm going to jump in here. King David took 10 concubines, I guess the ones that had slept with his son, and put them in a house and took care of them, but they lived as widows for the rest of their lives. And then King Amasa calls to his men, but he runs late. The king asks him to call his men, but Amasa runs late. So David warns Sheba will do us more harm than Absalom. Pursue him. And so they head out, and Joab acts as he's going to kiss Amasa, and instead he grabs him and kills him. And Joab and his brother pursue Sheba with the help of the men, I guess. With the help of others, Joab gets the head of Sheba and returns to King David in Jerusalem. Okay. And that's all that. So now, David avenges the Gibeonites. Now there was a famine in the days of David, and he consults the Lord. The Lord, he's finally getting closer back to the Lord again. He was feeling remorse. The Lord told David there was blood guilt on Saul and his house over putting the Gibeonites to death. That's why there's a famine, because they know usually a famine or a plague is because of a punishment that God is sending down. They were not the sons of Israel, but remnants of Amorites. And the Israelites swore to spare them, and Saul instead sought to slay them because of his zeal for Israel and Judah. And God didn't like that. So David asked the Gibeonites what he could do for them. And they said, well, we don't want money or gold or silver. We want to take 7 of Saul's sons and hang them. So David says, okay, no problem. But he will not give them Mephibosheth, because he had already had an oath with the Lord to protect him, the crippled one. So he gave 7 sons, and he took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan, and they buried them with those that were hung. Very brutal life, huh? After he did that, God heeded the supplications for the land, so he stopped the hunger, the famine, so food could grow again, I guess. So the wars with the Philistines. The Philistines had war again with King David, and his men fought against them. But David was growing weary. By now he's getting old. David said, this is enough, after an attempt to kill him. And his men said he could not go to war with them anymore. He's getting old at that point. So finally the Philistines were delivered to King David. So, because he's back with the Lord again after being resourceful. So David sings a song of thanksgiving because they won. He was so joyous that he sang this really long song. He's so happy that the Lord delivered him and praised him greatly, as much as in 2 pages, all that. It's very good, though. I just don't have time to read all that here, like 2 pages here. So now, the last words of David. Because David was a psalmist writing songs, they chose to highlight his last words. King David's last words made me sad for God. Every new leader God has to fulfill his plan. No one is perfect, and they fail him in some way. Now, David paid for his adulterous murder, but it was still very sad. So I think of us humans, and I feel sad for God. We disappoint him all the time, and I am vowing to do better. 407, I want to show you in here. I had wanted to show you this, that David cried over his son Absalom. It's very good. So, old friends, young people don't like it. Okay. So that's him getting old. Yeah. And it's a little different than today, but basically it's about growing old. Because David is getting old, so 407. Okay. Okay. So the man whom God made great. David is described well in the first sentence. Think about how far David has come. When we first met him back in 1 Samuel chapter 16, he was a lowly shepherd, the youngest of 8 sons, and yet God knew what was in David's heart and could see what kind of man David would become. He certainly wasn't perfect, but through all his life, David remained faithful to God. There's such a potential in each of us. We too have greatness within us. We only have to believe in ourselves and trust that God can and will call forth marvelous things if we follow him. After all, we are created in his image. Let God's grace flow through you. Ask God to help you become the person you were created to be. David composed beautiful songs for Israel. Let your life be a song of God's grace. Okay, so David's mighty men. So he's not, they're just saying those are his last words, but there's a little bit more to him. David's mighty men. They mention a lot of David's men and his commanders and his warriors. But one part stood out to me. David was longingly singing, "Oh, someone give me water from the well of Bethlehem." And it was a stronghold there at Bethlehem with the Philistines. So 3 of his mighty men broke through the gate and went and got some water and brought it to David. But he would not drink it because he said, he poured it out, and he said, "The Lord, far be it from me, O Lord, that I should drink the blood of men who went to risk their lives. Therefore, he would not drink it." And then he goes on to actually, then it goes on to actually list the name of each of the men who were in the mighty men of King David. They're all up to here. So evidently God wanted us to know that. And as you notice, David's getting a little soft compared to warriors back then. They don't care what happens, and he's getting older and more sensitive and more sense too. Sensitive and more sense. So the Lord, on another occasion, the Lord was angry, and he made David, he was angry with the Israelites, and he made David bring trouble for them. The Lord told him to go and count the people of Israel and Judah. So David gave his commander Joab order to do it. So Joab kind of hems and haws a little bit, but then he finally does follow the king's orders. And he comes back with a number of 800,000 and 500,000. So I guess the Lord wanted us to know that. So that's important. Judgment on David's sin. And I really don't understand this part, and breakthrough doesn't make it any clearer. I heard it as the Lord told him to go and do something. The census, he did it, and I don't get it. It's why he's getting punished for it. So anyway, David's heart struck him after the census and said, "I have sinned against the Lord, and I've done very foolishly." Again, I just don't get this because the Lord told him to. Which doesn't make sense. After the Lord told him. So the Lord gives him 3 choices and tells him, either you can have a famine for 3 years, or you will flee 3 months and your foes will pursue you, or 3 days of a plague in your land. David tells him, "I'm in distress." He's feeling stressed from this choice he has. He says, "Okay, let the hand of the Lord, for his mercy is great, but let me not fall into the hand of man." So the Lord sent a plague, I guess shorter than the 3 days, because it says here until 70,000 men die. And then I'll tell you the rest in a minute on this next part. Okay, so then the angel extends his hand over to Jerusalem, and the Lord stops him. And the interesting words is the Lord repents evil and says enough. I could hear him saying he regretted, but maybe it's just a choice of words here. I don't know. It's just kind of weird. And then something interesting happens. David spoke to the Lord and said, "I have sinned, and why are these innocent sheep going to have to pay for that? All these people dying from the plague. Let your hand be against me and my father's house." Wow. I thought that was, the world is, I was thinking about our plague. What are we being punished for? Some of us think we know, but no one has taken it upon themselves and asked for forgiveness, so I don't know. So anyway, David's altar on the threshing floor. So then David goes to buy some land so that the plague will be averted from the people. And the man with the property tried to just give it to him, but David refused because he says, then it's not my offer. So he pays him anyway. David goes on to build the altar there, offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the Lord heeded the supplications for the land, and the plague was averted from Israel, which I guess means the more than 70,000 men. So more men would have died. At first, I thought they were teaching the kids on David's sin, but here they do it at the end of Samuel's book at Breakthrough. At first, I was like, why aren't they focusing on that? Okay, so then I found out they did, but I didn't correct it because I didn't have time. I'm trying to find the page. Okay, here it is. Yeah. So I have to turn this sideways to get it all in. So even though it talked about his last words, it went into all this. But in the beginning of the next book, Kings, is when they talk about the specifics of how King David dies. So he hasn't died yet, and the succession, but it'll be in the next video. So it says, what we do when David, like David, when our conscience begins to hurt, try this prayer. Oh God, sometimes I can coast along in life and everything seems to go great. At other times I know something's wrong. I don't feel right inside. Help me to pay attention to my conscience if I'm feeling guilty. Let me be honest with myself and with you. Help me to ask forgiveness if I've done something wrong. Help me to do the right thing. And when I fail, help me to learn from my failure and make up my mind to do better. You are with me through it all. Don't let me forget that. Amen. So basically, he's guilty about his sinning about the adultery and then killing the husband. It's not about the census. That's basically what it's about. So that's the end of that. And we will be in Kings 1 through, I think, 11 to end the 6th period, but we're not there yet. Let me show you that front page. Yeah. So we did this and we did this. So we're done those two. Now we just have this before we move on to the 7th. We'll move, we're here. We'll move into the divided kingdom for next, after we finish the Kings. Okay. So we still have that to do. All right, that's it for today.